In this video, we'll learn how to use Spring Security with user accounts stored in the database. So far, our user accounts were hard-coded in Java source code, and we did that just to kind of keep things simple. But now we want to add database access. This is an advanced feature of Spring Security, and we'll actually use it in this video series. Now let's recall the user roles. We have three users, John, Mary, and Susan. We have our passwords and we also have their roles. And we use these in some of the previous videos. Now we'll simply put this information in the database. Out of the box, Spring Security can read user information from the database. By default, you have to follow Spring Security's predefined table schemas. But the nice thing about it is that by following their schemas, and then Spring Security includes all of the JDBC code to actually read information from the database, there's very little Java code you have to write as far as JDBC code for reading information from the database. All you have to do is simply set up the configuration, create the appropriate tables, and Spring Security will do all the heavy lifting for you in the background. Now you also have the option of customizing the table schemas. This is very useful if you have custom tables specific to your given project. The only thing that you'll be responsible for is developing the code to access the data. In this scenario, you'll have to write the low-level JDBC code or Hibernate code to read the data from the appropriate tables. You'll have to read the account information and also read the user roles. What we'll do in this video series is that we'll start off and we'll use Spring Security's predefined table schemas. That'll give us all the functionality and all of the code for hooking into the actual database. And this is all given to us out of the box. Here's the development process. The first thing is creating an SQL script to set up the database tables. Then we'll add database support to our project using the Maven POM file. Then we'll create the JDBC properties file. And finally, we'll wrap it all up by updating the Spring Security configuration to use JDBC for authentication and authorization. All right, as I mentioned, Spring Security has a default database schema, so you need to provide two tables, one called users and another one called authorities. And you have to use these exact table names. And also the tables need to have these specific columns: username, password, and enabled for the users table, and then also username and authority for the authorities table. You need to have the exact same table names and columns as shown here. Also, when you see the word authorities here, authorities is the same or loosely the same thing as roles. So again, when you see authorities, just think roles. Moving to step 1, that's creating the SQL script to set up the database tables. As you know, we need to have these two tables, users and authorities. I'll start off with users here. I'll go ahead and create the table users, and then I'll create those columns, username, password, and enabled. And then we'll also set up the primary key based on the username. And that's basically it here for the table. Again, the exact same table name of users and the exact same column names, username, password, and enabled. Now let's go ahead and handle the password storage here and insert our users. And then we'll do an insert into users. We'll get the values here for John, Mary, Susan, and we give the username, comma, the password, comma, the enabled status. And now what we have here is the actual password. So the password is test123. And remember, we have the actual encoding algorithm ID, and that's in curly braces. Here it's no op. That basically says the password is stored as plain text. And we'll start with this just for the beginning. Later on, we'll move into more advanced features by using bcrypt encryption. But don't worry, I have you covered. Now let's go ahead and move into the roles. And we have to create this table called authorities. Here we have two fields for username and authority. And then we go through and set up the unique key based on the username and authority. We also set up our constraints. And here the foreign key references the users table for username. And that'll basically create the authorities table. And again, remember, the authorities table here is the same thing as roles. All right, so now let's go ahead and insert some of our user roles into our database table. So we have our users, the tables here on the bottom, and then we simply do an insert into authorities. And again, authorities here, same as roles. we'll go ahead and do an insert here for John. He's an employee. We do an insert here for Mary. She's an employee and manager. And we also do an insert for Susan. She's an employee, manager, and admin. And internally, Spring Security will use the role underscore prefix for the actual role entries. Now moving ahead here to step 2, we add the database support to our Maven POM file. Here we make sure to give a reference to our JDBC driver. In this example, we're using MySQL, so we give the appropriate entry here for the MySQL group ID and artifact ID. Next, we have step 3 of creating our JDBC properties file. Basically, we can reuse our existing properties because we'll have this one database schema for our employee directory, and we'll place our security tables within that same database schema. So we can simply just reuse the same information. And now I can move into my demo security config. This is where I'm telling Spring Security to use JDBC Authentication. And then I inject the data source. This is the one that's auto-configured by Spring Boot. And then I tell Spring Security to use JDBC Authentication with our data source. And the really nice thing here is that we're no longer hard coding the users. We're actually reading the users and roles from the database. And now Spring Security will handle all the low-level work of reading the user, password, roles, and so on from our database because we're following their table schema and we're using their actual table names and their actual column names. So Spring Security will do a lot of the heavy lifting for us in the background. Ooh, a lot of stuff. But this is all good stuff, right? And I'm excited. So let's go ahead and move into the next set of videos and we'll get our database stuff configured and then we'll start writing some of this code and we'll actually hook Spring Security up to our database. So I'll see ya in the next video. Yo.